Earlier today, FBI Director Chris Wray and Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas declined to testify publicly at a scheduled Senate hearing on threats to global national security. This is a break in the precedent that has been set by years of open testimony. So here to discuss is J. Michael Waller. He's a senior analyst for the Strategy for Center for Security Policy, and he's the author of Big Intel: How the CIA and FBI Went from Cold War Heroes to Deep State Villains. So thanks for coming back on the show. And let's just dive right into this. Why do we not see these two men? Why are they declining to give this public testimony?
We don't know why they're declining, but certainly anything they say can and will be used against them once they leave office. So maybe that's one of the reasons. What it shows, though, is that they are contemptuous of Congress. And so they should be held up to the Bannon and Navarro standard and treated accordingly.
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting standard, although we should say it's a new standard, right, that the left has established. Do you have any hope that Republicans actually hold them to that standard? Is that in the works?
I don't see it. But they still should. I just don't see it.
Do you think, let's put it this way, yeah, I don't either, actually, but do you think that that there will be some justice for these guys later on? I mean, it does seem like we potentially are going to have some people in place who might actually go after misdeeds committed over the last 4 years. I have a little bit more hope about that, but what do you think?
Well, yeah, and of course, somebody like Chris Wray, for him, prestige matters more than anything else. And once his wrongdoing is really uncovered from the inside, he'll never be able to recover from it. If I was running the show, I would have an investigation of Homeland Security Secretary Navarro, a counterintelligence investigation of him, because I don't think he was working with U.S. interests in mind.
Yeah, say more about that. I mean, I think that people know that Wray is bad news, but say more, drag that out into the light for us. What do you think is underneath the hood?
Well, it's one thing to be a D.C. insider and then become a head of the FBI, but really you don't run the FBI. The FBI runs you. So Chris Wray was the palace eunuch of the Bureau. That's part of how D.C. works, but that's not treason. Looking at Mayorkas, though, it's different. I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm just saying that something's not right. Because if you have somebody born in Cuba at his age, who comes here as an infant, they're all solidly anti-communist. The only ones who are doing everything the Cuban regime pretty much wants are people who've been co-opted somehow during the way in their lives. And the Cuban regime, they've got a really excellent intelligence service that we vastly underestimate. And I can't find a thing that Mayorkas has done as Homeland Security Secretary that's been against the interests of the Cuban Communist Party.
Well, we know that they like to cover up their tracks. And we talked to you before about paper shredders and everything that was going on. Earlier this week, we saw an industrial paper shredder truck that was parked right outside of the DOJ. Now, it's just me. Maybe you don't try and put the gigantic truck with the logo park it around the corner, you guys. What do you see when you see something like this that they're just, I mean, I don't know, are they trying to troll us at this point, or is this actually happening?
It's actually happening, but I think in this case, there are underground garages there. There are lots of discreet ways of doing things, and that they've always been that way. But in this case, I think they're really giving the finger at the Trump administration and to the rest of the country, saying, we're going to destroy documents, whether you like it or not, and we're going to do it in a huge way. So they're sending a message.
Hey, so I have to ask you today's, I mean, Gates is out, right? Gates was in, Gates is out. Speaking of the DOJ, what are you hearing in terms of who might actually be nominated now? And do you have any thoughts about who that person should be?
Well, it was kind of funny because with Matt Gaetz, who it took me a while to get used to the idea of him as Attorney General, and I thought, no, we really need a wrecking ball. We need somebody who just doesn't care, doesn't want a big law firm job, doesn't want the prestige, doesn't want to make friends. He just wants to do the job. So I thought after some consideration, he'd be the right guy. But there are other folks out there, too. There's Mark Paoletta, a fine individual. There's a Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, although we need him in Texas, but we also need him in the country. So there are a couple other people out there who would be excellent attorneys general.
Well, while we have you here, let's talk about the funding for the State Department's Global Engagement Center. It's set to expire at the end of the year. Now, it tracks disinformation and correctly puts it on the record nationally. So could Donald Trump, and if we look at him, the congressional Republicans, could they decline to renew this type of funding?
Sure, and I think they should in this case because it's completely lost its way. I'm very supportive of the State Department tracking foreign disinformation and countering it. It's part of the State Department's job. In fact, I worked on that years ago with the Reagan administration with the Office to Counter Soviet Active Measures, which was an interagency group that included the State Department. So it's a really important job when it's done right, but it's just been completely abused and politicized. So we should just shut it down and start fresh later on.
I mean, have you written anything, or do you have anything out there in terms of like a structure for cleaning house at these departments? Because one of the things, like I hear all these ideas. We know a lot of smart people, right, who talk about this. But when you think, I keep on thinking about this, right? And you think about Department of State, the State Department. I mean, this is a place that people have been talking about cleaning house for decades. Right. And when you think about the Department of Justice, the thorough sort of corruption that's there, the wrecking ball you were talking about, I mean, this is not going to be easy. And a lot of people have talked a big game for a long time, as you know, and not done the job. So what kind of advice do you give about how to really clean house at either of these enormous departments?
It's really hard when you're dealing with people, and it's much easier to say and recommend than it is to do. But in Big Intel, I gave a chapter on what to do with the FBI, how to break it apart and parcel out the functions and the people with them to other agencies so that there's no centralized power that can abuse the public. I had a similar plan for CIA, and these are just to get conversations started, but there are ways to do it. With the State Department, though, State Department is one of the most vicious agencies of the U.S. government. It's even more vicious sometimes than the intelligence services. So when you're talking about state, it's a question of redefining its mission. It was not originally created as a foreign ministry. It was created to handle matters of state, and it became a foreign ministry over time. But I think if you reduce the State Department severely, I think you could cut back by 2/3 to 3/4 on the personnel. A lot of really unnecessary personnel, in addition to personnel who are doing worthless or counterproductive missions. And you make it a consular service, meaning looking after U.S. interests in other countries and U.S. citizens in other countries. And then a very small, very skilled diplomatic service like we used to have before, even, say, going back to the time of John Quincy Adams, who was sort of the classic American diplomat and diplomatic leader. You can accomplish a lot with very little, as Donald Trump proved when he hammered out the Abraham Accords in the Middle East. State Department was hardly involved at all.
So we know Donald Trump has put up Ratcliffe for CIA already. We're still waiting on the pick for FBI. A lot of people think it's Kash Patel. Your thoughts on Ratcliffe for sure being nominated, and then who would you like to see put in the director of the FBI?
Well, Ratcliffe is a really good pick for the CIA because he has a lot of experience. He was already director of national intelligence. He got his feet wet in that, and he got burned a little bit. So that's all really healthy, and it's good experience for him. It's a tough time right now in the world. We're up against the Chinese and the Russians and the jihadis and everybody else. We need to have a strong foreign intelligence service like the CIA, but we also need to slash that down to its real essence to make it an elite service that's not going to be abusing the public. I think Ratcliffe can do that, but it's a question of, does he have the presidential authority and the chainsaw necessary to make it happen? As far as FBI director, again, it's kind of like Matt Gaetz. Kash Patel's a great guy. When I first heard his name being floated as FBI director, I thought, well, it's going to take some getting used to. But there you do need a wrecking ball. You do need someone with experience in intelligence. So he's a lawyer without law enforcement experience, but he's got intelligence experience. And of course, the FBI is a domestic intelligence agency with police powers, which it never was until the past 25 years. So he's a really ideally situated person who, like Matt Gaetz, doesn't care about making friends in Washington, wants to accomplish the mission. So he's the right guy to be the last FBI director. Take an orderly way to pull the thing apart and don't take any nonsense from the people who would otherwise try to bind his arms.
I love the sound of that phrase, the last FBI director. Do you have any thoughts before we go about the strengths and weaknesses, Tulsi Gabbard, if she was, to walk into that role?
Well, there's nothing like a person who's been burned badly who can do a really good job to undo things. If you look at her track record, I'd never put her in such a position like that just based on her statements in the past. On the other hand, she's been burned. On the other hand, she's had a last-minute conversion. So I think that somebody like her, who also doesn't care about making friends, doesn't want to have a beltway existence where she's going to get rich as a contractor after running intelligence, I think she'd be a remarkable choice for this. And I think she should also be the last director of national intelligence. She should preside over dismantling it and returning it to a state where our intelligence community serves the public, not abuses the public.
Jay McAwaller, you're speaking our language. It's music to our ears. I hope that they can get that done. Thanks for joining us today.
Great to be with you both.
Matthew, it's just one of those things where, again, we hope that these are the people that are going to be put in the positions and they actually follow through with the things that we've all been talking about now for about 2 weeks.
Well, I recommend, if you're interested in this and you're listening out there, go get his book,
Yes.
Big Intel. Like, start reading up on this, because whoever comes in is going to need to adopt an actual plan. And as a citizen, you need to have an understanding of just how messy this situation is. So, it's exciting because I've never been this close to thinking we actually are going to put in people who are going to try to really do the deal. And we're really talking about the real problem, the extent of the real problem. That's incredible, but it still has to be done.